Hello, welcome to the Fantastic Fiction at KGB reading series. Fantastic Fiction is a monthly speculative fiction reading series held on the third Wednesday of every month, hosted by Ellen Datlow and me, Matthew Kressel. We spotlight well-known and up-and-coming science fiction, fantasy, and horror authors, and admission is always free. We publish a monthly podcast and video so people who can't attend the in-person event can still enjoy the readings. If you'd like to support the series, you can donate at kgbfantasticfiction.org/support. Anyway, on to the show.
Good evening, good evening. We're going to get started. Welcome. Thank you for coming out on this piss poor night. It's really, you know what? There's something really cozy about being in a nice warm bar when it's raining outside. You get to hear some great fiction. Maybe we can get like the TV to play like a YouTube fireplace or something. Yeah.
I'll play it for my watch.
There you go. Mary can. That's a joke from last month. Does anyone remember? I'm Matt Kressel. I co-host a series with Ellen Datlow. We've been doing the Fantastic Fiction at KGB for a while. The series itself has been going for more than 2 decades. There is never a cover charge. It is always free. All we ask is that you buy a drink, hard or soft, and tip your bartender, Mary, who is working hard to keep you hydrated. Let's give a hand to Mary. Thank you, Mary. I am excited about our guests tonight. I'm always excited. I'm never like, they're right. Sometimes I am legitimately excited. We have tonight Yume Kitasei and Sarah Pinsker. Let's give a hand for our guests tonight. We have a podcast. If you can't make the reading, kgbfantasticfiction.org, or just search your pod site for Fantastic Fiction at KGB. Subscribe, and you can hear the readings if you can't make it. Our first reader tonight. By the way, thank you all for a wonderful 2024. You really made this series great. We were, I know it's been a few years, but after the pandemic, the series... we were concerned about the audience, about whether the series was going to continue, and we've just had like great crowds, great audience, great guests. So thank you all for 2024. We're looking forward to 2025. Our first reader tonight is Sarah Pinsker. Sarah Pinsker's a starred Booklist review called Sarah Pinsker's latest, Haunt Sweet Home, fun, eerie, and unexpectedly beautiful. She's the Hugo and Nebula winning author of the novels A Song for a New Day and We Are Satellites, plus the collections Sooner or Later, Everything Falls into the Sea, and Lost Places, both published by Small Beer Press, and over 60 pieces of short fiction. She's currently the Kratz Writer in residence at Goucher College and lives in Baltimore with her wife and 2 weird dogs. Here's Sarah Pinsker.
Thank you. Hello. So I'm going to read from Haunt Sweet Home. And this is a really tricky book to read from because it's a novella, and I feel like there are certain parts I can't read to you because they're a little bit spoilery, and I don't want to read the beginning because it doesn't match the rest in tone. So I sort of jump into the middle of the second chapter. That's what I'm going to read to you from. But because I'm doing that, I'm going to give you a little context, which is this is a book about a woman named Mara who has been kind of trying to figure out what it is she wants to do with her life. And her cousin, who is the host of a reality show that combines a fixer-upper show with a paranormal show, has invited her to work on his show. And she's just found out, she's just started the job, and she's just found out that she's part of the night crew. What's the difference? The night crew is the one that makes the houses that they're fixing up during the day haunted. So she's found herself in the position of being the production assistant, which is the person who has to do all the dirty work. And they're explaining the job to her. So this is the night crew's first meal together, where they are they're at a diner and they're getting sort of the lowdown on the house that they're going to be haunting and the people. Is that good enough? Yeah. You're with me. All right, great. All right. While we waited for our food, Ms. Tran profiled the owners. They're two tech bros from Boston. Well, one is from Iowa and one is from New York, but they live in Boston. They run a frat together at MIT and made some money developing a farmer's market app. Not zillionaire money. It tells you how to find farmers markets or what they have in season or something. And it also helps farmers run their CSAs. Now they want to restore this house and orchard. Maybe as a business later, but just for fun for now. Matthew Chen is the one from Iowa. He's the one who found the house. Hart Thatcher is Upper East Side. Old money, I think. He'd wanted another place they saw, but it cost more and had less acreage. He's a little hung up on the fact that they are two grown-ass adult men platonically buying a $300,000 house together, and they don't even get their own bathrooms. He wants to get started on expanding the half-bath right away, but Matthew wants to start with that god-awful kitchen because, and I quote, grown-ass adult men have gotten by with a whole lot less. There are 2 toilets, and we can take turns with the shower, but we need to be able to cook a meal without getting food poisoning from the counters. I like this guy, said Andy, very practical. Let's get to the important part already, said Buzz. How are we using the orchard? The food arrived and we paused to distribute it. When we'd eat in a bit, Felix spoke. So, the orchard. I've got a few things planned. You're not afraid of the dark, are you, new PA? Somebody probably should have asked her that before now, said Andy. I didn't say that I hadn't even been told I was hired for night shift, since saying that would involve telling them how I'd gotten the job. I grew up playing in the woods. So let me tell you the plan, said Felix, without acknowledging that I'd spoken. It didn't seem like the plan would be any different if I'd said the opposite. Anyway, it was true. We often got sent out into the woods between Uncle AJ's and Oma's. Everyone else was so much older than me, and I was constantly getting left behind to figure out my own way. I'd learned not to panic, because they all got annoyed if they had to come find me. After dinner, Felix shifted a storage tub from his room to my back seat, and then I took him to Walmart, since apparently he was the only one among us who didn't drive. I was conscious of my check engine light, though at least I'd gotten enough gas to turn off the low fuel alert. He was friendlier one-on-one. It turned out he knew all kinds of awesome practical effects, which he enthused about on our drive. We bought a cooler and ice and stood in the store parking lot while he cut holes in either end of the cooler. His tub in my back seat held a battery-operated fog machine, and he demonstrated how to pump some liquid he called fog juice over ice in the cooler, so the fog would stay low and billow out between the trees toward the house instead of dissipating upward. I'd seen mysterious mists on the show before. Now I knew how that particular magic happened. So much for ghosts. Park here, Felix said, just before we reached the driveway. If we carry everything through the woods from this side, we won't risk anyone at the house seeing us. Dusk had fallen during his fog demonstration, and it was fully dark now. I turned my hazards on since the road where we'd pulled over had no shoulder, then switched them off again at his frown. Maybe if my car got hit on the job, the production would pay for me to buy a vehicle manufactured in this century. Or maybe I should have read all those waivers more closely. I hoisted the ice-filled cooler, heavy and awkward. I didn't want to complain about anything on my first day, so I just gritted my teeth, thinking of how buff I'd be after a couple of months of this. If I wasn't allowed hazard lights on the car, Felix definitely wouldn't approve of a flashlight. I didn't have a free hand to hold one in any case. We had to cross a drainage ditch and a stand of pines to get to the orchard. The ditch was dry, and the moon filtering through the trees was still bright enough to let me mostly see where I was going, except for what was directly ahead, blocked by the cooler. I tripped as we approached the orchard. You okay? Yeah, just some rubble. Felix looked down. What's left of a stone wall. Odd that it's out here, not near the apple trees. I wonder what it marked. He towed some underbrush out of the way, following the border. I watched as his posture changed. He was clearly excited about something. What? I asked. Look for more stones. Over here, this side. You can put down the cooler. I did as I was told. This patch was filled with vines and weedy trees. Holly, I discovered when I raked my arms, and mulberry. But beneath those were more stones. gravestones. We'd found a cemetery. A cemetery old enough to have sunken and grown over and eroded, erased. Do you see any names, he asked. No, I think they're all too worn to read, even if it wasn't dark out. It took some searching, but we eventually found a partial stone still standing, like a single snaggletooth and a mouthful of broken ones. The shard read Han, and below that 18, but it was impossible to tell whether the 18 was part of a birth date or a death date or a year or a century. Could be a first or last name, I said, or a pet. He ignored the pet part. This is great. We'll finish setting up for tonight like I planned, and then Lauren can decide tomorrow whether to tell the day crew to send the owners to discover this or to lure them out here tomorrow night. Either way, this is story gold. Felix left the cemetery reluctantly, glancing back one more time. The twisted, overgrown apple branches caught my hair and scratched my face as I followed him into the orchard proper. We stopped 4 rows in and 8 trees from the edge. I didn't see any reason he'd chosen that particular place, but he pointed across the lawn. You can see the house from here, but to them, this will just be a tangle. Will you be able to find your way here again alone? No flashlight? We can get your car off the road, but you still have to come in from the side, not the lawn, so nobody sees you. I pictured the ditch, the cemetery, the low branches, and nodded. Easy enough to count rows and locate the equipment again, now that I'd done it once. We found our way back to the car, and I drove us up to where the others were parked, as if we hadn't stopped along the way. Since we were so late, I didn't get to meet the owners. Felix said it was just as well. If I was beneath their notice, they also wouldn't notice my absence. For the next couple of hours, I was kept busy with hey you stuff, pretty straightforward. They filmed the owners, Matt and Hart, arguing over who got the master bedroom, with its bay windows and massive built-in armoire. Miss Tran managed to convince them both to sleep in there and decide who it belonged to later. I don't think they recognized they were being manipulated, but I could see why she did it. Easier to film them in one room, easier to infect each other with fear's contagion in one room. She set up an interview spot with the armoire as backdrop, giving them a view across the lawn and down to the orchard through the bay window. They inflated 2 mattresses in the room center. A little after midnight, Felix nodded, cueing me to slip out of the house. I walked to the tent as if I'd been told to get something, then ducked under the back flap so it would shield me from view if anyone looked out. The same angles that had been set to force their view toward the orchard would expose me if I wasn't careful. I didn't want to mess things up my first night. I didn't have to go far into the trees to conjure the feeling that I was alone. I heard crickets and an owl somewhere far off, but no voices, no cars, no machines at all. The absence of human sound struck me as a lovely thing after 2 long days of learning new names and faces and rules. The dark orchard didn't scare me. It reminded me of home. Different trees, different textures underfoot, but the same enveloping darkness. The same shift to reliance on a different set of senses. I was suddenly glad for all the time I'd spent in the woods behind Oma's house, searching for deadfall to drag back to her workshop, trying to find my way home after the others forgot I was following them. Was everyone who took this job as comfortable out here? Maybe other seasons didn't start outdoors and simply required no fear of attics or basements. Maybe this was why the position had come open twice since Jeremy had first asked me. I counted rows and found the equipment we'd left a few hours earlier. The fog machine had faded into the darkness, but the cooler's white lid made it easy to spot. We should probably have covered it in leaves. I sat on it with my back against a tree and waited for the appointed fog time. When I stood again, I bashed my shoulder on a branch and an apple fell at my feet. Nobody had said anything about not eating them, and they were all just going to waste. I polished it on my shirt and bit in. I'd never tasted a Gravenstein before. It was perfectly ripe, honey-sweet with a hint of tartness. A dribble of juice trickled down my chin, and I wiped it with my arm. I was standing in an orchard in the middle of the night, eating apples off a tree, and getting ready to make my first attempt at scaring people for a living. One of the better situations I'd found myself in lately. At 12:43, I followed Felix's directions and started the fog, which did what it was supposed to, hugging the ground as it crept between the trees and out toward the house. After, I skirted the lawn coming around to the driveway and hung out in my car for another hour so they wouldn't associate my disappearance and appearance with the timing of the fog. I desperately wanted to close my eyes, but I didn't want to risk sleeping longer than I should and losing the job on the first night. Before I finally headed back to the production tent, I grabbed a case of bottled water from the van as Felix had suggested, so it would look like I'd left with a purpose if the owners noticed me. Buzz dozed with his head on a table, his hand still clutching his insulated coffee mug. Andy and Felix were playing cards, and Miss Tran was reading something on her phone. She was the only one allowed to have one on set, because the rule against them was hers to break. Andy smiled when I entered and whispered to me that it had looked awesome. The moon was almost full, and the fog had really stood out against the dark orchard. I asked if the owners were asleep, and she pointed at the bedroom, where a flashlight threw flickering arcs across the room. We interrupted them again half an hour later for another interview, and then again at 4. The guys were punchy and irritable, but not particularly unsettled. We let them fall asleep just before dawn, at which point I returned for the cooler and fog machine, so they wouldn't find evidence if they went exploring during the day. I think I also would have been punchy and irritable if I had had to talk to anyone at that point, and my head felt disconnected from my body as I trudged through the orchard. My eyes closed a couple of times, involuntarily, but each time a branch whacked me in the face and reminded me I needed all senses on deck if I was going to walk around in the dark. We went to Denny's for breakfast around 6, a meal where literally nobody spoke other than to order food. Miss Tran didn't say anything about paying, so I ordered an omelet and then cut it in 2 so it would last for another meal, even though I was famished. I ate all the toast and potatoes. Back at the motel, there was a note on the table from Kat saying she hoped I'd had a good first night and that she'd accidentally exploded ramen in the microwave, but she'd clean it in the evening. Sorry about the smell. I crashed until 5 when I jumped in the pool and swam a few laps, then showered in time for our crew meeting. Since it was an official meal, I ordered an Indian dish and a milkshake. Miss Tran started the meeting saying my fog had done its job. Andy threw a fry at me. She's terrible at compliments. You did great. We got a really good panic shot from one of them. He thought he saw a man in the branches. Then the other one freaked out because yesterday's weather shouldn't have been conducive to fog. I ate the thrown fry slowly, wondering if that was true. I only knew a little about fog, mostly in relation to environmental stuff, like how there's a town in Peru with no lakes or rivers or wells, so they installed these big fog catcher screens that collect hundreds of gallons of water. Felix interrupted my straying thoughts. Why would we care what real weather does? It's supposed to be haunted fog. Yeah, that's what the first guy pointed out to his buddy, Andy agreed. We didn't even need to intervene. Miss Tran smiled. The day crew said it was all they could talk about in their rise and shine. That sounded like a better compliment. I asked Andy later, and she said the rise and shine was the first interview of the morning, deliberately filmed in the first golden rays of sun, pre-coffee and pre-shower, to maximize exhaustion. Did they get sent out to explore today? I hadn't been late to the meeting, but I was still last to the table, and everyone else seemed more in the know than me. Maybe because I was bottom rung, or maybe because my night kept me running around so much it was harder to keep the plot. Miss Tran waved her fork. She'd been picking raw mushrooms out of her salad, and one bit flew from the tines. They did. They made sure they found your little cemetery. They also sent Kath into town records since the advanced research team had missed it, but she came up empty, so it probably was just for pets, or else it predated the orchard and house by enough time to have been completely forgotten. I'm sure there's some Hans who died in the town at some point, though, even if he didn't have any connection with the house. We can lean into that. He could be a jilted lover, Felix said, haunting the orchard where he and his fiancée courted. Cliché. We all looked at Buzz, who rarely spoke, and waited for him to say more. When he didn't, Miss Tran nodded. Yeah, I think we did that plot in season 4. What about a boy who fell when picking apples? The buyer said he saw a man, though, not a boy. I said it cautiously as a question, since I wasn't entirely sure I was allowed to contradict the boss. Good point. A migrant worker who fell picking apples? A migrant might not make it into town records. Were there migrants then? A hobo stealing apples during the Depression? Is hobo still an okay term to use? Felix shook his head. Those trees would only have been babies then, too small to climb, let alone fall from, for a farm worker or a hobo or even a kid. And the stone looks older anyway. He doesn't need to have climbed. Maybe he was a hobo they'd taken in and everyone liked him and something tragic happened, like he was allergic to bee stings, and after he died they realized nobody even knew his last name. Or a traveling salesman? Those dudes in the house would relate. Melancholy. Felix was ecstatic. Melancholy is so much more interesting than evil. I like melancholy better too, said Andy. They have to live in the house after we're done shooting, so I'd always rather leave them feeling sorry for their ghost than scared of it. I'm okay with either and both, as long as it keeps people watching, said Ms. Tran, with the final word on the subject. They tossed ideas around the table and a few more fries. I still didn't feel confident enough to say much, so I listened as they hashed out the details of poor Hans' life, death, and afterlife. Not a hobo, but a farm worker, in an older orchard planted long before the current one. Felix and Miss Tran both seemed to have a general philosophy that the team did better work when we had a common vision. Eventually, the conversation came round to what they had planned for me. I'd start with another midnight fog, then wave a flashlight through the fog and the branches at an angle to the house. The owners in the 1890s were the Day family, so Buzz would record himself saying, Miss Day, in his radio baritone, and I'd broadcast him from the orchard. It was a Rorschach recording, since Miss Day could also be heard as mistake, which seemed like a good thing for a ghost to repeat. Buzz said it might also sound like Miss Day, but the others agreed only a Canadian would think that. Darkness fell, and I got to do my fog thing, then hauled the evidence to my car. Afterward, the flashlight bit, and a little later, Buzz's recording, which sounded suitably creepy, calling out between the trees. This took us to about 2 a.m. Miss Tran had ordered me to stay hidden in case the owners decided to explore. If they did, I'd break branches and play Buzz's recording a few more times, while keeping a healthy distance. I sat under a tree for a while and listened for the front door or voices, but nobody came. Waited long enough to feel like the only thing haunting the orchard was me. I wouldn't have minded closing my eyes, but falling asleep and letting the owners discover me there would be as instant a sacking as letting my phone ring. I couldn't even read. The moon was still bright, but those big old Gravensteins had too thick a canopy for its light to filter down to me. All I could do was wander between the trees, listening for the house, and keeping an eye out in its general direction, which I did until I tripped and sent myself sprawling. Not a bad fall. I didn't hit my head, though I gave my right wrist a jolt and scraped my palms enough to bleed. The tree I'd tripped over must have been struck by lightning at some point, the way it had split. One side was still standing, but at a steep angle. The roots had broken through the ground like fingers from the grave. Those were what had caught me. About a third of the trunk had cleaved away, held upright by the next tree over. 2 dead branches looked like arms reaching toward me, and for a moment I took it for a person. Even after my eyes made sense of what I was looking at, there was something expressive about it. I knew how I was going to spend the rest of the long night. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, do you have books to sell?
I have a couple of copies of one of the collections.
Okay, you don't have a copy of that.
I didn't think I was allowed.
By whom? Well, you could have. Yeah, maybe. Who knows? Anyway, we're going to take a break, have another drink, and then talk to your neighbors, and we'll be back in a little while. For the second half of our reading. Hello. We're going to welcome. Oh, before I welcome, I said I wanted to tell who's coming. Oh no, stop it. No.
It's revenge, Ellen.
It is.
Revenge.
Yeah, but I can delete it if he does anything with it for my life. Anyway, okay. Forthcoming readers. We have some people coming up. January 8th, 2025, Ben Berman gone, and Jacob Weissman. Now, Jacob's he's a Tachyon, publisher of Tachyon, an owner of Tachyon. And I wasn't even really aware that he writes, although I'm sure I must have seen something by him, but I think he has a new novel out. I'm not sure. February 12th, Rebecca Framow and Clay McLeod Chapman. March 12th, Victoria Dalp and Jedediah Berry. Yeah. April 9th, Ursula Witcher and Andrea Hairston. May 14th, Carol Geisander and Daryl Gregory. And then over the next months after that, David Surface, John Kessel, Caitlin Rozakis.
Yes, Rozakis.
I was right? Okay. Deborah Every and Shiva Kumar. So that's who we've got coming up from now, for the next several months. But in the meantime, I'm going to pronounce this right carefully. Please welcome Yume Kitasei, is the author of The Deep Sky, The Stardust, GRAIL, and Salt Crop, forthcoming in 2025. She's half Japanese and half American and grew up in a space between 2 cultures, the same space where her stories reside. She lives in Brooklyn with 2 cats, Boondoggle and Filibuster. Her stories have appeared in publications including New England Review, Catapult, Smoke Alarm Quarterly, and Baltimore Review. You can find more information about her at www.yumekitasei.com. She chirps occasionally, and Yume writes at Instagram. And Instagram? Or at? Because You don't chirp at Blue Sky? Anyway, okay. Okay. Yeah, here she is. She chirps at Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky. Oh, maybe not TikTok soon. TikTok may be banned, we shall see. But please welcome.
Thank you guys for coming in this weather. I'm short, so the first step is always lowering the microphone.
Okay.
Thank you. So thank you. So I don't know if any of you have read either of my books. My first book is The Deep Sky, which is a interstellar murder mystery. They're knocked off course, and they have to figure out who did it. And then this book, which is what I'm going to read from, which is my second book, The Stardust GRAIL. And I like to say this is sort of Indiana Jones in space, but the anti-colonial version, because instead of stealing from people and putting it in museums, they're sort of doing the opposite. They're breaking into museums and returning them to alien cultures, alien civilizations. So I'm going to read you the first two chapters of The Stardust GRAIL. Since I'm going to probably forget at the end, I will also say I don't have any books to sell. I'm not even sure what the rules are about that, but we don't care. My publisher might care, yeah, exactly. But I will say, and I don't know how long it's going to last, but it's definitely true tonight. Both of my books, if you are intrigued by what I read, are currently available across all of the ebook platforms for $2.99. So yeah, very low commitment. Yes, this is The Stardust GRAIL. Also, I heard we might have some people from New Jersey in the house tonight. Is that right? Anyone from New Jersey? The New Jersey people. Oh, okay. Never mind. Well, I was going to give them.
Subways are having problems or flooded.
Yeah. Oh, really? Yeah. But the New Jersey people come by car.
Oh, okay. Bridge and tunnel.
Unless they come by path.
Yeah. Okay, well, I was hoping to pander a little bit tonight because this is a space opera that starts in New Jersey. But instead it's all New Yorkers, so we'll pretend that's funny. Okay. Oh, great. I lived in New Jersey for a while, so I'm not ashamed of my roots. The largest private collection of rare artifacts from other worlds could be found in central New Jersey at Princeton University. And if anyone knew Maya Hoshimoto was a thief, they wouldn't have let her anywhere near there. Fortunately, no one did. And anyway, she wasn't a thief anymore, just a 31-year-old graduate student entering her second year toward a PhD in comparative cultures, who happened to know a lot about foreign artifacts. It was an excessively pretty end of summer, the kind where birds were chirping and a few flowers hung drunk from their stems, but the air had just an edge of premonition to it. For Maya, who had grown up off-world under a dome, weather of any kind still felt like a gift. Maya wandered into the sub-basement room of the Dr. Frank R. Humbert Alien Artifact Collection and Rare Books Archives, where staff were unboxing recent acquisitions. Her friend Pickle, one of the assistant archivists, looked up and grinned at her. "How do you always know when we've got a delivery? I didn't even know you were capable of waking up before 10. "Obituaries," Maya said, then realized that maybe this wasn't the kind of thing a graduate student paid attention to, that the grandson of a famous explorer, Dr. Nkosi, had died in his bathtub a month ago. She added, I saw the van outside." Most material ended up sitting in storage for a couple decades, but the Nkosi Foundation had dropped a hefty monetary donation to ensure that these items were given priority treatment. Maya watched them remove artifacts from the boxes onto 2 long tables lined with black velvet. Her studies included an internship with the archives, which had a special relationship with the Department of Comparative Cultures. And while the pay was ridiculously low, she enjoyed hanging out there. She was friends with most of the staff, and every once in a while they came across something truly special, something that might, just maybe, unlock a constellation of discovery. "Quite a personal collection," said one of the other grad students. Maya raised an eyebrow. What she saw so far was disappointing. Counterfeits and other common items. She reached for a round stone object etched with wavy lines. "According to the inventory notes, those are worth more than your yearly paycheck," said Pickle. "Really? I know I don't get paid that much, but these are just personal hygiene products from the current era," said Maya. She lifted it closer to her nose and inhaled a complicated scent, almost like chocolate with a burnt undertone. fashionable right now on certain Belzor worlds, even accounting for the cost of interstellar shipping. The others stared at her. What else do we got? This one's a 1,000-year-old Frenro sculpture. The other grad student offered a peek. Maya reached for the snarl of metal and stone. It reminded her of an old friend and a ship and all the ever-changing stars she'd left behind to be here. Careful, said Pickle. This one's fake too, and I'm always careful. She lifted it higher so its polished facets caught the light and examined the smooth surface. Am I allowed to curse? Yeah. Bullshit! Sputtered Brian, a conservator for the Artifacts Division. It's been authenticated. It's one of the most valuable pieces of his collection. Maya probed one of the metal bits, ignoring his protests. These types of Frenro sculptures are like a memory box of places a Frenro has lived, hence the mixed media. Yeah, and this piece here is, she scanned it again with her ocular lenses. It's quartz. So? Quartz that appears to contain a significant amount of nitrogen, Maya says. And nitrogen in high concentration is poisonous to Frenro. Oh my god, that's so true, said Pickle with a laugh. And this fragment here, Maya pointed out a black shard, is a settler-manufactured data chip, the kind we used to make. During the war, she meant, but didn't say. She remembered her parents assembling the tiny parts that went into them every night at the kitchen table, but best to avoid mentioning that in mixed company. Brian came to examine it. Maya would have liked to linger over the rest of the items, but there was a blinking in her lenses, indicating an incoming call from her lead academic advisor, and unfortunately could not be ignored. Her old Silver Planet 9 bomber jacket barely kept out the chill of the stacks she'd retreated to for privacy. No need for anyone to witness her humiliation. The sub-basement was a solid 18 degrees Celsius, dry and dimly lit, to keep mold and deterioration at bay. The south side of the floor held metal shelves full of as-of-yet untouched artifacts and the long tables where they'd been unpacking. The north side boasted rare volumes and correspondence, Pickle's domain. There were never many people around. Maya slipped into the expandable meter gap between the shelves and slouched against the cold metal frame. The gloom was bearable, except it reminded her too much of the banged-up, dusty orange world she called home. She removed a chunky camera ring from her pinky and balanced it on the lip of a shelf, and then she touched her earlobe. Dr. Liam Watterson's head materialized above a row of mint-condition, crimson-bound minutes from some conference on interstellar relations. His face was puffy and pale under a shock of red hair, except for a flush that blotched his cheeks and neck, scowling as usual. For as long as Maya had known him, he was irritated or anxious or both, and there was something comforting about that consistency. "What is this?" he asked, without preamble. Oh, so he had read the paper. He'd called a week ago and asked her to send over what she'd been working on this summer for Xenology, a premier scientific journal. Liam wanted to get her a head start on accruing publication credits, which was important if she wanted a future in academia. And it was extra important if she planned on focusing entirely on museum studies rather than fieldwork. Except she hadn't been working on the paper. She had spent the last 2 months hiking and attempting to catalog every flavor of ice cream in New Jersey, which left the only acceptable option of somehow condensing what should have been months of research into 72 hours and appending a description of a concert she'd once attended while high on otherworldly psychedelics. Still, considering it was closer than Liam had ever been to another world, she thought it had been fine enough contribution to the field. Fine enough-ish. Maybe the detail about people vomiting acid on the carved stone floor and getting stuck when her soles began to melt was a little too much. It's just a rough draft to give you the general idea. This isn't a research paper. It's a personal essay. Maya may have grown up speaking settlement Japanese, but her English was fine, and Liam enunciated every consonant like he wasn't certain she understood. You can't submit this. I gave you an extremely detailed outline, and you've driven over it backwards and forwards with a truck. How have you not made more progress? The deadline for submission is in 3 days. She decided to try for flattery first. Well, I figured, as the foremost human expert on Belzor culture, you'd appreciate the unique set of first-hand observations. Thank you for reminding me at every opportunity of all your field experience, snapped Liam. It was a sore subject. He might be an expert, but he had never left Earth due to a serious fear of flight, which was rooted in some wealthy childhood trauma involving a private plane. Despite this, his research techniques were excellent, and he was, Maya hated to admit, brilliant, which was how he had managed to develop cutting-edge theories without leaving New Jersey. No shade to New Jersey. No, sorry, I didn't mean that. Look, all we have to do is sprinkle in a little data and, like, charts, and this will be another award-winning... What data? What charts? Liam's voice jumped an octave. And I told you to stop referencing your precious mystical grail in any papers. This was supposed to be a paper about Belzor music, which your grail has nothing to do with, even theoretically. And even if it did, I'm telling you, no serious scholars write about it. That's why it's fresh, Maya attempted to smile. It's a myth, he growled. Maya crossed her arms. It's real. Front row have seen it with their own eyes. Visual receptors. Like when? 1,000 years ago? Everyone knows front row don't have the best memory, said Liam. At this point, Maya could have pointed out that only one of them had ever met a front row, let alone operated an LLC with one, but she decided accepting the lecture was the quickest route to ending the conversation. Her committee of 3 advisors was already down to 2 after a disagreement over an interpretation of Belzor courtship practices that she maintained was problematic. The interpretation, not the practices. Her advisors were now just Liam and Dr. Barnes, a professor who had been on the verge of retirement for 15 years and was happy for Maya to do whatever she wanted. If Liam dropped her, the department would likely ask her to leave. Liam scrubbed his hand through his beard. This is a fucking nightmare. Like, actually, this is a manifestation of a recurring nightmare that I have. At least he was transitioning from anger to anxiety, so that was good. I don't know what to say. I've been trying to give you a chance, but you don't make it easy. It's like you don't care. Why did you even come back? Because passion can be dangerous, she could have said, and I'm too old to keep chasing ghosts. But she said nothing, because when she said nothing, Liam tended to keep going until he tired himself out. Maya ran a finger over the neat row of books. She inhaled the scent of paper and dust and that sweet, acrid chemical glue they used for reassembling ceramics. She had come to Princeton for graduate school 10 years ago. She and Liam had started in the same cohort, but Maya had taken a leave of absence in her first year to explore an existential crisis, and Liam had gone on to graduate and publish a book that was not only suitable for a mainstream audience, but a bestseller. Now Maya was starting over, and Liam was prodigiously young, tenured professor at their alma mater. His husband, Quentin, was an old friend of Maya's. Small galaxy, academia. That was, in fact, how Maya and Liam had reconnected when Maya decided to come back to Earth and give academia a second try. Maya had been good at school once. She'd graduated with high honors from undergrad back in the day. And she did have impressive field experience. Last October, newly returned to Earth, she helped Liam publish a journal article that got stellar reviews. She even enjoyed life at the university when she wasn't drowning, the way a conversation at 2 a.m. could crack open your mind, the discoveries you might find combing through archive materials no one else had bothered to unbox, and the possibility that you might be able to contribute something to the universe without anyone getting hurt. But lately, every time she sat down to work, she seemed to get distracted. She'd survived her first year with a brutal slog that had been helpful for pushing away all other thoughts. But then summer had come, and since she'd eschewed the fieldwork route that most of the other students took, she'd been left knocking about campus. There are only so many ways I can dodge the chair asking about your performance metrics. The chair of the department already held against Maya that she hadn't done any fieldwork the past summer. Maya wrinkled her nose. She liked to fantasize about a time when academia wasn't about raw numbers. Articles published, conferences attended, colleagues supported, awards won, and grants pulled in. But she supposed if there was one thing people were good at, ivory tower or no, it was cramming themselves into some sort of grind. She'd been proud when she was admitted 10 years ago, the first settler from Peace Love to attend an Earth University, and one of the famous old ones at that. Her mother had cried, and her father had been insufferable. But then it was miserable. She'd come back because she thought it would be different now that she was older, more mature, wiser, smarter, with nothing to prove. But also she didn't know what else to do. Send me the new draft by tomorrow noon, Liam was saying. We need to get you back on track, or... He leaned ominously into the conjunction. That bad, Maya said. She was joking, but not really. She didn't want to know the answer because deep down, not that deep, she was as vain as the next person. She adjusted the books before her so they formed a precise red line. Liam shook his head. We want you to reconsider fieldwork. Maya's finger jerked one of the soft leather volumes out of formation. She didn't mean to leave Earth anytime soon, if she could help it, even if missing space sometimes felt like having the refrain of a favorite song rattling around her head without being able to hear it for real. You never did any fieldwork. Well, you're not me, snapped Liam. And you don't exactly love the museum stuff. Fair. She struggled with the quietude. It left too much space for guilt and grief to sneak in the window in the early morning, so she couldn't bring herself to get out of bed all the morning. She'd come here for a fresh start, and yet some days she could barely drag herself to lectures. What about the fieldwork proposal you put together a while back? I talked to Professor Mohammed, and he'd still take you. That was under duress. I'm not spending a semester in the Belzor-Noto region, said Maya. The chair wants to put you on probation. You haven't just been struggling. Your work has been bad. And it's offensive because I know you know this, and you're capable of doing better, so you're really just wasting my time. I don't have the bandwidth to save you from yourself. I can't spend all my time propping you up. I have other responsibilities, my own problems. So this afternoon, 5 p.m., come by and we'll go through it, and follow the outline this time. He cut the connection before Maya was able to retort, I don't like your new mustache, so I guess we both have issues with how the other one spent the summer. It's probably for the best. She put her head down on the cart of unshelved materials. The sudden silence pressed inward, and she tried to imagine she was out there in the black, enfolded by a blanket of starlight. No, even with her eyes closed, she could feel everything around her. She was drowning in an excess of matter. Liam was always direct and often rude, but rarely this harsh. And what made the lecture worse was that he wasn't wrong. Therapy had helped, but she just didn't fit in here. She never had. Lone settler woman among all the rich and privileged Earthborn students. But she wasn't one to give up. She needed to find Pickle. That's it. Thank you. $2.99.
Thank you very much. Hang out for a little while, talk to people, and we'll see you next month. Thanks.
You have been listening to the Fantastic Fiction at KGB reading series. Check out our website at kgbfantasticfiction.org and click on support if you'd like to help keep the series going. Anyway, that's our show. Thanks for listening and see you next month.